All right, if you just do it, it'll turn out okay. Hey, everyone, it's me. You know who I am, but I have a guest today. Let's him introduce himself.
Well, I am Joshua Bowen. So my wife and I do a YouTube channel called Digital Hammurabi, and really she does it. I just kind of contribute every now and again now, but we're all about the ancient Near East and the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. So all that ancient world stuff, that's what we do. So super excited about it.
Awesome.
Oh, and I have just been informed that our 3-year-old is filling his Christmas plastic candy cane with tomatoes, little baby tomatoes, instead of candy. So there's that.
Well, I guess tomatoes can be candy, I guess.
I guess to him they are.
Awesome. We got some guests. Venerable Bede and Critical Cripple. All right. So you said you like Old Testament time and Near East. So you know a lot about the Bronze Age collapse era.
Yeah, I mean there are people that specialize in that particular area. Eric Klein wrote a book. I think he's got a new edition of it out. It's just a couple years old, but so he wrote all about that. But yeah, I mean, there's I
think I have that book on my Audible.
1177.
Yeah.
Yep. And he's a super nice guy too. Very personable, big into public outreach. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, so I'm an Assyriologist, which, I got my PhD at Johns Hopkins, and basically, my degree is in the languages and cultures of ancient Iraq and Syria, and I minored in Hebrew Bible, so the Southern Levant as well.
So I was wondering about something. If you don't know, this is fine. Do you know if in the Old Testament era, the rise of the Israel kingdom happened at the same time as the fall of the Bronze Age? They could only get the power because the other empires fell around them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the working hypothesis now. That so just so everybody listening is on the same page. During we know a lot from the 14th century BCE is a period called the Amarna period. We have a lot of cuneiform tablets from that period. And they talk about, there are basically two types of letters that we have, two types of tablets. One is are these letters between major powers in the ancient Near East. So, Egypt, the Hittites, Assyria, Babylonia, Elashia, Arzawa. And these are, they call them the Great Powers Club. And so they're these, they treat each other, they refer to each other as brother. It's all these great kings that are writing letters to each other and sending greeting gifts and, complaining to each other. It's an interesting time.
Cool.
But at the same time, in the Southern Levant in Canaan, you have a lot of sort of petty kingdoms, smaller kingdoms.
Like tributary kingdoms.
Yeah, and they're all very tiny.
Kind of like what we with the Middle Ages would have dukes or counts, like feudalism almost.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know a lot about that period.
Okay. Yeah, too modern.
But essentially, you've got this small king, this of a king of a small little kingdom, and then another one over here, another one over here, another one over here. And they're all writing letters back and forth between themselves and the pharaoh, and they're complaining about the other little kings that are next to them, and they're but they are all vassals. They're all vassals to the pharaoh, and so essentially, Egypt has a great deal of control over Canaan during this period. And so what ends up happening is at the end of the late Bronze Age, right around 1200 when this and everything sort of falls apart because of this sea people / famine / a bunch of different factors. Egypt loses control eventually over these Canaanite city-states or these Canaanite kingdoms. And what happens is because that control is now gone, it allows the local rulers to sort of expand. They have some freedom now, so they expand, and you start getting these independent, larger independent kingdoms. So, you start seeing like the Edomites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Israelites, the Philistines, come in this period.
Right.
So,
and it's believed now that the Israelites and all of them weren't foreigners, but they were part of the inside of the Canaanite grouping family.
Yeah. The analogy that I like to give with that, and again, this is if people are interested in reading like the people that actually work on this, there's an excellent book out by Avraham Faust. It's a 2001 book, and it's the Ethnogenesis of Israel, I think is what it's called. But of course, William Deaver has written on this, Lester Graba as well. So there are lots of people that have written on this sort of thing. But I kind of like to think about it as, when you're in high school, and if you had the good fortune of sort of staying in the same middle school, high school throughout. I didn't, but you end up going through middle school with this sort of group of kids, all from, it's this sort of core group of kids, and they all move up through middle school, and then they go into high school. And through middle school, everybody's friends, everybody's, it's all, doesn't matter, everybody gets along, whatever. When you get to high school, now you've got different groups, right? You got different cliques.
At least from my school, both our middle schools combined to high school and a whole new group of people together.
Yes. I mean, now you've got like the kids that play football, you've got the cheerleaders. I'm really going back into the past here, but you have the people that are more, like gothic, and you have people that are nerds, or I don't know, whatever. Now all I'm doing now is just describing Saved by the Bell. That's all I'm doing. But these are all the same kids, right? They're all from the same community. They're all essentially from the same area. There's not a lot of difference between them, except for the fact that now they're identifying with these different groups. And if you were to ask, like the going with the Saved by the Bell thing, if you were to ask like the Slaters or the Zach Morrises, do they identify with the Screech, type of group? Well, no, it's completely, we have nothing to do with them. We're totally different. But in the reality, they're all the same group of kids, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about the Israelites, sure, there may have been, I mean, it's always very complicated, very messy, but there very well may have been some people, small groups here and there, that came in from the outside and joined to this group in the highlands called the Israelites. But I think that most scholars would say that they're just a local Canaanite group that established a different ethnicity. They set up different ethnic markers, and sort of use those to set themselves apart. And then this is where coming up with like an Exodus story, or really setting themselves apart in any way that they could, was important to their identity as Israelites.
Yeah. So that's why until they used the church and them teach that they came out and took over instead of more like an inside. It was more like an inside rebellion instead of a conquering.
Yeah, I mean, there's been sort of. I just wrote a book recently on. I talk about biblical archaeology in it for a chapter, And, there's been this movement in biblical archaeology where originally, they described it as having a Bible in one hand and a spade in the other, right? Archaeologists spade in the other.
Kind of hard to do. Wouldn't it be like, okay, do it one-handed?
Yeah, it's like it's like, all right, where do I dig now? You flip open to Exodus and you go, okay, we should excavate there because the Bible says, well, the field has come quite a long way, but because of that initial idea that, all right, this is the inspired word of God, and it is historically reliable, at least for the most part, then it became this thing where they would dig where it seemed like the Bible suggested that they should dig. And after a while, it became clear that it doesn't really work out very well. And so there's been this move from a conquest model, which is very much in keeping with what the Bible says happened. Israelites are down in Israel for 430 years, and then they come up and they wander in the wilderness, and then they conquer Canaan under Joshua. And of course, we know archaeologically and historically now that there's really not a lot of evidence for that. In fact, there's quite a bit of evidence against it. So then some different models were created, and actually a really good book that people could read. There's a little book called The Canaanites, and it's by Mary Ellen Buck, B-U-C-K. And she talks about, and again, it's not that long, but she kind of just talks about who the Canaanites were, and just sort of lays out the history of Canaan all the way down into this period that we're talking about. And so it shows how there's continuity between the people groups in that region, really going back, I think, into the 4th millennium, if I'm remembering correctly. So,
yeah. Back in the 90s, there was this. I saw this series that got me interested in the history of that era. But by this archaeologist guy. But apparently, I've been recently. He's been kind of on the outs, or I guess debunked or something. You've heard of him, David Roll or something?
Yeah. He's big in the Exodus, right? Talks about the Exodus a lot.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. So there are some people, and I haven't read any of his stuff or anything, but I think that he holds to like a 15th century. I'm not sure about that, but I think he holds to like a 15th century Exodus.
Apparently he had this big thing where the Egypt thing was all combined together and made the thing shrink or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And it was weird. It was interesting at the time, but now I read he's not that group anymore.
Is he the guy that found the chariot wheels? Like, says he found chariot wheels in the Red Sea?
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Maybe. But all I know is I know he said apparently the 21st and 20th Egypt dynasty happened at the same time, or something like that.
Okay. I see. Yeah. So I know the name, but I clearly don't know what he's arguing.
Okay, but that was like 20. But at the point, but now that's like 30 years ago. That's like forever. 30 years is probably forever in the archaeology era.
Yeah, stuff can move quick. That's for sure.
So let's talk about your name. So you're named after the lawgiver Hammurabi from Babylon.
Yeah. It's an interesting, it's an interesting story actually. How we picked the name. So Megan also went to Johns Hopkins and studied Assyriology as well. And for anybody that doesn't know, Hammurabi was a king in the 18th century, and he essentially, rose to power, and he conquered all the major kingdoms around him. So, Elam out to the east, and then Larsa down to the south, and then Eshnun off to the east, and then finally Mari up to the north. And he sort of established this old Babylonian kingdom.
That's what I was saying. Would that be the old Babylon, the new Babylon, or the middle Babylon?
Kingdom. Yep, that's right. Old Babylonian kingdom. And so after he did all these things, probably in the middle of the 18th century, he commissioned this Stele of Hammurabi, the law codes, or the Law Collection of Hammurabi. And so, anyways, very important figure for the period. So Megan, she won a Dean's Teaching Fellowship when she was in school, and she had to teach a class, and the class was about digital humanities. So trying to bring, the humanities into the digital age. And because she works in this period of the ancient Near East, she said, you know what, I'm going to call it Hammurabi in the digital world, or in the digital age. Can't remember. And so then she taught the class. And when we started the YouTube channel a couple years later, we were thinking about what to call it. And I said, why don't that was a pretty cool name. Why don't we just call it Digital Hammurabi? And it seemed to go really well. So we'd been doing it about 2 weeks, and we got a comment on one of our videos saying, are you guys associated with the Digital Hammurabi at Johns Hopkins? And I said, I don't know, what are they talking about? So I Googled it, and about, 15 or 20 years before, there was a project, we knew nothing about it, at Johns Hopkins, where we went to school, called Digital Hammurabi. It was like, what are the odds? And of course, I was terrified. Nobody would believe that we didn't know about it, because what are the odds that this thing would be at our school and we didn't know about it? We just happened to pick that name. But we got it all straight. It was fine.
Cool. So the school wasn't going to copyright strike you for the name.
No, because so the guy that was in charge of it is Professor Jerry Cooper, who's a professor emeritus now, and I saw him at a conference, and he's like a giant in the field. He's a brilliant scholar, and I went up to him and I said, "Listen, I just wanted to say, we didn't know anything about this. We're really sorry." And he goes, "Oh no, go for it. I'm glad that you're doing something with it. That project has been defunct now for like 20 years. Like, don't worry about it. It ran out of money. I'm glad you're doing something, so it worked out well."
Sweet. Yeah, that's much better than my origin name, right? The city I grew up in, and this year I graduated high school.
Oh, I see. Nice.
So do you have your own set of laws that you have based on, since you're named after him?
Oh.
Your channel have a law code?
No, I'm certainly not that clever. Not that clever.
So before all this lockdown happened, were you ever out on the field work?
Yeah, we have sort of an interesting backstory. While I was at Hopkins, so I'm not an archaeologist, but because of what we do, archaeology was, drilled into us while we were at school. And my Professor Glenn Schwartz, who's up at Hopkins, obviously still, before the civil war in Syria, he had a site just east of Aleppo called Al Mara. And he said to me about just when I was just about done my first year, and he said, I want you to come out for a season, come out during the summer to excavate with us. He said it'll be really good for you. And I was floored that he asked me, because I was not a very good archaeology student, because I had absolutely no background in it. And so he let me come out, and I excavated there for a couple months at Al Mara, and he put me out at the edge of the mound. It's kind of called the tell, and there was a wall that we were digging down around, and it was really neat. So I was out there I was in charge of 5 local Syrian, part of a Syrian dig team, and they only spoke Syrian Arabic. So I got to use my Arabic a little bit. But it was the last season they could dig there before the Civil War broke out. So yeah, it was a pretty neat experience. But Megan, she did some site survey out in Turkey for a season. So she's got some archaeology experience as well. And it was neat because that experience came in handy in the new book, because I was able to sort of speak to how archaeology works, and not just from an academic sense. Like, reading through this book, I've actually been out there, and I'm certainly not some seasoned archaeologist or something, but I got to work with the seasoned archaeologist to learn how it works. And so
we had a question from the chat, if you can see it.
Did it survive the Civil War? Actually, I haven't really kept up on what's going on in Syria. Obviously, I mean, sure, everybody that knows it was pretty devastating out there. But we were there just before, sort of, I think, just the year before it happened. So
you just missed it.
Yeah, it was. But it was a phenomenal experience, because Syria, before everything went south, it was every week we got to go into Aleppo for the day. And I remember going and getting a falafel or some shawarma, and we'd go to the Barone Hotel where Agatha Christie and Max Malin were, where they used to hang out, I guess, and get a beer for 150 pounds, which was about $3. And it was a neat experience.
So, speaking of that, is there ever issues with that? I don't know you personally, but archaeology have to deal with political and religious people when you're digging.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, it's and it's not just political or religious. I mean, a lot of times these sites are, I guess less so in Mesopotamia, but sites are often not just out there waiting to be excavated. They're either adjacent to a village, or a village is built on them. And so, or there's a grave, like a graveyard that's been placed on top. And so it's very tricky to get permission to dig. And, I know that where Megan was excavating, they were just walking through fields, like fields of crops, and you can't just go digging it up, Yeah. So it can be very tricky. Yeah, definitely.
You just have to go a few miles away. You dig under the crops.
Yes. Oh gosh. But it's one of the things that's neat is that I think that experience gave me enough exposure to the basics of archaeology to feel comfortable writing about it, and like how archaeologists do what they do. And so understanding how stratigraphy works, looking, like when you cut through a cake and you have a bunch of layers in the cake, that's sort of how it is out on a site. You dig down and you can look at the wall that you've just exposed, and you can see different occupation layers. So I kind of write about it in a way I hopefully that's easy to grasp.
Yeah. Speaking of layers, I know how the layers in geology work, different layers of the period, but what are the layers in the archaeology? Different those layers?
Yeah, same sort of principle. I mean, I'm not a geologist, but so what ends up happening, particularly in places like Mesopotamia, is buildings and structures are made out of mud brick, right? A lot of mud brick, and mud brick lasts, maybe 50 years or so before it has to either be substantially reworked or just rebuilt. And so what happens, and this is everywhere, when buildings get, knocked down and rebuilt, or when a fire comes through and burns things down, what ends up happening is all of the pottery, the animal bones, really any of that material culture, things that people use, gets sort of compressed down into a thin layer, and then people build on top of it, and then that eventually gets, compressed down, and then people build on top of that, and each of those layers that gets compressed down is a layer. It's like a snapshot in time, like a time capsule, and they call that an occupation layer.
Okay.
So when you dig down then and you turn and you look at the wall, you can see, all right, here's an occupation layer and here's an occupation layer. Actually, Megan drew a really cool picture of it. Let me just see if I can pull it up real quick, because it explains, or it shows it there. This is from our new book, but it's sort of like that.
Nice.
Those different occupation layers. And that's how it works. So then you can, if you find, you find certain pottery, or you find, I don't know, a tablet, a dated tablet, cuneiform tablet in a layer, then you can start to piece together, okay, that tablet's in this layer, so then it, it's one piece of evidence that it comes from that period. So then you can kind of date that layer.
Especially if it has writing on the tablet. You can,
that's right. Yeah. So it's neat. It's complicated, but it's neat how it works.
So back in those days, they usually dated things by king rings.
Yeah, there are different ways that they did it. So the Assyrians had these things called, they're called limu lists, but they're basically just named after the rulers, or the people that held this particular office. The Babylonians, the Old Babylonian, and earlier, around that period, they had these. They named each year after. They named each year after a significant event. So they would say, like, the year that Hammurabi defeated Rimsin of Larsa, or the year that Hammurabi rebuilt this particular wall, or the year that Shulgi, built the temple to, I don't know, Nana or something.
And how did we match them up, that dating system to our current Julian/Gregorian calendar?
It's not easy. So one of the neat things about working in Mesopotamia is that, if you think about how people that work in the Hebrew Bible or in the New Testament, they're not working with originals, original written documents. They're working with much later copies. And
yeah, because unlike the stone writings before, the paper and stuff and papyrus probably don't last as long.
That's right. Yeah. And so, in Mesopotamia, they wrote a lot of the time on clay, and on stone sometimes, but often clay. And clay lasts, right? It gets it gets preserved. So we have probably, I think the latest estimate I heard is that we have about 500,000 cuneiform tablets in existence that we have. And so what ends up happening is us, let's say a scribe has a tablet like this, right? And he sits down with his stylus and he, writes out this tablet, and then down at the bottom, or on the back, down at the bottom, he puts, the 15th day of the month of, whatever, in the year that Shulgi built such and such boat. Well, all that year that we find tablets, they're all going to have that year, the year that Shulgi built the whatever boat. Well, what the scribes did is, after a while, they started compiling a list of all the year names on tablets. It's like these collection tablets. And so you'd have just year, 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 year in the order that they named them. And we have some of those tablets. So what ends up happening then is that we have a relative sequence of years. Now the problem is like start getting a fixed point on one of them. All right, where is this year? Like if we can nail down on the calendar where this year is, like okay, this year is 1750. Well, then we know all the years that came before it. We know all the years that came after it up, on that tablet. So there are certain ways that scholars do that, and again, it's very complicated, and it's a whole subdiscipline in the field. One of them is astronomical events. So
yeah, you can trace back the stars to certain times.
That's right. So one of the things the Mesopotamians did is they tracked, and not just the Mesopotamians, but they tracked movements in the sky. Significant astronomical events. So, hey, there's this major eclipse. And again, it's outside my field because I'm not an astronomer, but
all working together.
That's right. And so, I think one of the big ones is, I always get the year wrong, but it's in the 8th century. I think it's like 763 or 716 or something like that. But there was I think it was an eclipse, a significant eclipse. And we know, like, they recorded it in such a way that, and they told us what year it was in their sequence. So then that was like a peg, and that allowed us to get all the way back, I think, close to the middle of the 2nd millennium and well down into the 1st millennium. And then I know that they used, there was a northern Mesopotamia, like plank of wood that was found, or pieces of a plank of wood that were found. And they used like dendrochronology to like get that really close. Anyway, there are lots of different ways that they sort of do that.
Cool. I didn't you could do the age of the tree ring when it was already wood planks.
Yeah, it's above my pay grade how it works, but yeah, they figured something out. But it's complicated. There's no question it's complicated. And that's why, like particularly if you look at Egyptian history or something, but even in Mesopotamia as well, you have high chronology, middle chronology, low chronology. And there's always debates about, I think it's 5 years later. I think it's 5 years earlier.
Is that the same as the old, new, and middle kingdoms of Egypt?
That's different. That's periodization. It's a different periodization. But this is like, so high chronology, or, it's a difference of, I think that actually, one scholar will shift the entire sequence back 10 years, or they'll shift it forward 10 years.
Okay, I think that's what that David guy did. He did the shifting thing. And
a lot of times, this is where it gets difficult. It's one thing if you are faced with chronological data that don't line up, and because of the data, you say, all right, we may have to shift this. It's another thing to say, the Bible says that in 1446,
this had to happen.
This happened. So now we have to shift the whole thing to make that fit. Like that's not the way to do it, right? It's two different things. But yeah.
So why did we stop using clay and stones and start doing paper and papyrus instead?
I think probably, I guess I'd have to think about why it is that they would have done that. I suspect storage is one thing. Even though I think it's probably harder. I've never done it, so I don't know this, but I suspect that while it might be harder to make papyrus or to make some of these other media, that they're just easier to use.
Probably easier to carry. It's probably easier to carry too.
Yeah, and certainly cuneiform. The system of cuneiform itself is very complicated, and so once you start developing an alphabetic script, in Canaanite or in Ugaritic, there's a Canaanite script. I mean, a Canaanite script that's alphabetic, and of course with Hebrew and then Aramaic and so on. You don't need this vast array of cuneiform signs.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'm sure that plays into it, but
and they write that. Oh, they still do that error. I mean, they write that. Did they write like left to right or right to left?
So cuneiform, Sumerian, Akkadian, Ugaritic, all written left to right. Of course, Hebrew is written in Aramaic. They're written right to left.
Okay.
So it just depends on the language.
Hey, that reminds me of a joke I heard one time. Want to hear it?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, all right. This guy was hired to do an advertisement for his big drink promo, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but he knew the language. He knew the language, so he did the thing via pictures. The first picture he had was this guy all dead and dehydrated. The second picture was this guy drinking their product. Third picture was a guy all happy and revitalated.
Right.
The project failed. And the guy said, "What happened?" He said, "I didn't know they read left to right."
So the guy's all happy and excited, and then he drinks it and dies. That's that makes sense. It's pretty good.
I got VB has another question for you.
Why are biblical ages so strange? You mean like how long people lived?
Not sure.
I mean, if that's the question, so this is sort of a trope in the ancient Near East. This idea that before the flood or back in like pristine time, the ancient past, that people lived much longer. That life was like a golden age. And so then when for example, there's a text called the Sumerian King List. And in the Sumerian King List, these kings rule for crazy long periods, like 30,000 years, 40,000 years. And then it says that the flood sweeps over. And then the years start to get shorter, the years of the rain. And the same sort of thing shows up in the Bible. So Genesis 5, for example, you see these people living for hundreds and hundreds of years. I think Methuselah is the longest living, 969 years. But then the flood happens, and after that, the life spans start.
Apparently, water is bad for us. Then
right. That's it. Water's bad.
I think we know there was no big global old world thing, but do we know if there's a big local event that they might have got the mythology from?
Yeah, I mean, I doubt that there is. So here's what we know. It seems like the flood stories in Mesopotamia, the earliest that we have written sources for the flood tradition seems to be, right around either the end of the third millennium or the beginning of the second millennium. So as far as Sumerian is concerned, like right in the middle. It's not really early. It's not really late.
So about 2000 BC?
Right around 2000, yeah. And we know that the biblical flood tradition comes from the Mesopotamian flood tradition. So I don't think that there's anything as dramatic as, I know that, and again, it's outside my field, but there's apparently evidence for like 13,000 or something BCE that that the Mediterranean broke free somehow and flooded.
I think that's about the time the Ice Age was ending or melting. Probably, I think maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but
Oh.
The problem is that if that is the source of that mythology, that's a really long time to maintain that sort of tradition. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't think there's anything. I don't think we need anything quite that drastic.
Yeah. Well, really, the area has been known to flood a lot. The rivers.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? The Tigris and the Euphrates, they flood quite a bit. So, and not only that, there are, we always think about, when we think of Mesopotamia, we think of the two major rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, but there are these canals that run through, these like river courses that run through the center. And if you ever look at a map that describes that, I mean, it looks kind of crazy. And those, because Mesopotamia is so flat, those river courses can change their path pretty quickly and just shift. So, a city getting wiped out by a flood is not crazy to think about. So, a tradition building up, or this motif building up, that all of a sudden water comes in and wipes out, a city, building that up to wiping out the region or something is not
the region or the whole planet.
Yeah, and of course, to them, there was no planet to think about.
That was their world.
Yeah, I mean, we have things like I think from like the 8th or 7th century, we have the Babylonian Map of the world. And
this was chariots were, I think chariots, but this is like pre-horse riding itself. I think they had the chariots, maybe the chariots, but no, you couldn't go that far from your thing. It would take forever to go.
Yeah, I don't even know that. There's just a different way of thinking. So if you look at how the conceptualization of the world, there's a book by Hurwitz called Mesopotamian Cosmic Geography, and he talks about this sort of thing. And there are different myths where a guy flies on the back of an eagle and he goes up in the air, and when he looks down, what's being described seems to be land with like water just around it, right? Like this cosmic water. And this is the same sort of thing that we see in the Babylonian Map of the world. You have this center portion and then the cosmic water out here, and then these really far-flung places, like where the flood survivor lives, way out there past the edge of the world, So it's a different mindset. They're not thinking about a globe. They're not thinking about, Australia or those sorts of things.
I heard that the river systems, that the Tiger and Euphrates were more chaotic flooding, and the Nile one was more structured or more on time stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, Egypt, has sort of this, and again, it's not my area of specialization, but like the Nile floods very consistently, and when it floods, it leaves this like black, very fertile land, and so that's but it's, as you say, it's tamer, it's more predictable. The Tigris moves much faster than the Euphrates, but the Euphrates is, they're both rivers that again are subject to flooding. They're subject to shifting and breaking free of the levees, and so they're much more.
So would that be a reason why that area with the Tiger had lot more small, like multiple kingdoms up and down, empires rising? With the Egyptian was more steady in their empires, a few here and there dropping, like in the intermediate periods, but over there it's like Babylon, Assyria, over here Persia, old Babylon, new Babylon, old Assyrian.
I'd have to think about that. I mean, if you look at a map of Egypt, I mean, you do have a lot of cities going, up and down the Nile. And of course, the different cataracts are.
Yeah.
But I mean, most of the major cities in Mesopotamia are along. I'd have to look back, but most of them are along these canals because in southern Mesopotamia, in particular, that's how it worked. They're below the 200 millimeter ISO height. And they're below rainfall farming.
Cool. I was just wondering, since that area seems to have much more empires up and building up a lot than the Egypt area did. You see a lot more rise and falls over there.
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder that some of that has to be that Mesopotamia. And now I'm just thinking out loud here, so nobody should quote me on this, but I think that it's much easier to access Mesopotamia physically than it is to get down to Egypt, because there's a very narrow route to get down to Egypt through the Levant. And of course, there are major roads down there, but it's. I feel like Mesopotamia is flat. So I think that probably plays into it, at least some.
Okay.
But
I was curious about the history of that. So, also, it's weird to think about, like, Egypt. The fall of Egypt, the history of Egypt happened way before our modern Roman Greek time, like 500,000 years before that.
Yeah, I mean, Egypt goes back to, I think the Old Kingdom started thinking about around 3000.
Yeah, the pyramids were, talking about the new kingdom of Ramses II. The pyramids were like way before him even.
Oh yeah. And again, like I'll in volume 2 of my this series that I'm writing, I get into Egyptian history, but it's been a while since I've read that stuff. So digging that back out right now is more difficult. But yeah, I mean, those pyramids. What Khufu has one. There was I can't remember the order there.
Yeah,
they were built in, but
then they stopped. Let's stop doing pyramids and do temples instead.
Yeah.
So how do they date? And over in the Mesopotamia area, how do they date the eras like the New Babylon or New Assyrian or Old Assyrian? How do they figure those out?
I mean, a lot of them are. I don't want to say arbitrary, as far as like how they classify them. So the Old Babylonian period, roughly between like 2000 and 1600 BCE, is basically the time they call it that, because that's when, during that period, Babylonia comes to its first major domination over the region. And it's based, a lot of these periodizations are based off of who's in power, right? So, back in the third millennium, the end of the third millennium, you have the Ur III period, and it's because it's when the city of Ur has really expanded out. And so they're in control. And then you have the Isin Larsa period in the early second millennium, and that's when the city of Isin is in charge. But then it switches to the city of Larsa, and then after that, that's when Hammurabi, and his dynasty take over. So, those are useful terms. In archaeology, they'll talk about like early bronze, middle bronze, late bronze, iron 1, iron 2, those sorts of things. Whereas if you're thinking historically, they'll say, Old Akkadian period, Old Assyrian period, Old Babylonian, Middle Assyrian, so forth.
And the archaeologists would name this era the digital pandemic era.
Yeah, yes. I'm sure that's in the works, I'm sure.
So was that Was that area even back then like what we call the Silk Road, even in the BC time, between the areas over there and the areas that were in the Far East?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have travel and trade between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. And in fact, there's a book, it's been a while since I've read it. There's a book, I think it's Marchese, but it's something like Mesopotamia and relations with the Indus Valley, something like that, something very creative like that. But it talks about what we know about trade archaeologically and then later historically, what we know about trade between Mesopotamia and the East, and how they went along, the waters down the Persian Gulf. So it's actually there's quite a bit of information that we have.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. I also learned that area recently. It wasn't just land trading. The ocean, around the Indian Ocean, apparently has very what's it called? Like the Egyptian river flooded, their winds or water currents were very predictable. They could do stuff, timing stuff, a lot easier.
Yeah, it's definitely not. I say this a lot. It's definitely in my area of expertise, but yeah, I mean, there definitely is evidence of them at least moving along the coastline in the water. Yeah, so there's actually quite a bit of evidence that we have.
So, personal question: is your like 3-year-old interested in your field of study at all? Is he like a little archaeologist or a little history studying?
Speak of the devil, come here. You want to say hi?
Daddy,
Yeah.
I just want to go outside.
You just want to go outside? All right, we'll go outside in a few minutes. Don't worry. Here, come say hi. Oh, goodness.
Yes,
Hi.
Star.
You're so crazy. All right. I love you. Are you sticking your tongue out, you goofball? All right. I'll take you outside in a few minutes. Get out of here, goofball. All right, say bye. Yes, you're a star. All right, come on, stop. Stop. You're going to get the microphone all wet. Come on, buddy. I love you. I'll be out in a few minutes.
He'll gotta start his own channel. So you said you wrote a book.
Yeah. So Megan and I, we actually have 4 now. We put this one out, Learn to Read Ancient Sumerian, which is just an introduction on how to read Sumerian. That one's been really popular. I published my dissertation as a popular level book, but I don't have any copies of that here because we sold the last one. I wrote this one, Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery? Which is, I think, a useful little book on that particular topic.
Are you have them like an Audible or anything like or audiobook versions I can download?
That one is,
Okay.
and then this one is the one that I just wrote, Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament.
Yeah, I read that one too.
This one is almost done. It's audio production, so yeah, that one I'm excited about.
You and her? Are you and her? You're Megan the talker or someone? Yeah, hire somebody else to do it.
In this one, I read like the body text and then all the quotes, which there are a lot of them. She reads the quotes and she has that British accent, so it's worth it. It's worth to get the audiobook just for that. But yeah, no, this one, it's still a little up in the air. But we'll be coming out with that soon. But who's gonna?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of audiobooks on my way to and from work.
Yeah, no, it's it should be coming out soon.
When I'm bike riding, so looking forward to it. So anything coming forward? Anything coming on your anything coming on your channel that you want to advertise?
Can't think of what's coming up. I know that. Well, I'll plug another channel that I really like. So the Atheist Network group is hosting in October, like an in-person meetup conference sort of thing. And I'll be speaking there. It's out in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I'll be speaking there. Seth Andrews will be speaking there. I think 5 or 6 other speakers. And it should be a really good time. So it's good to plug that when we can. But if you haven't subscribed to the Atheist Network group, I don't know what you're doing with your life, you know.
I got last question.
When are the twins getting a show? Soon enough, I am quite certain, Dave. I'm kind of surprised you haven't heard them yet. So
Yeah,
they're being quiet.
Yeah. As for me, this Tuesday I'm interviewing a musician interviewer from a band. So if you like music, check it out this Tuesday. Like I said, I'd love to talk more with you sometime in the future or now, but kids demand your attention. So
Indeed they do.
You got to do this.
I appreciate you having me on, man. It's been great.
Do you have a catchphrase you say before you end any of your shows, like a big catchphrase?
Our catchphrase is resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?
Cool. And as I always say, never stop learning and enjoy the randomness. We'll see you next time. Bye.